morning began like it always did, quiet and deliberate. I woke before sunrise, brewed black coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and stepped out onto my porch overlooking 2 acres of private, hard-earned freedom. The sky was still painted in bruised shades of violet, the air cool, the world calm. I built this life intentionally, out here beyond the reach of HOA rules, beyond petty committees and self-appointed tyrants who thought control equaled order. For the first time in years, I could breathe without paperwork telling me how. But that morning, peace didn't last long. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because what happened next will make you question what control does to a person who can't live without it. It started as a low vibration under my feet, faint at first, like distant thunder. Then came the sound. Diesel engines growling in unison, heavy and layered. I stepped off the porch, coffee cup in hand, squinting down my long gravel drive. Through the haze of morning light, I saw a convoy of charter buses rounding the bend, 10 of them, massive, white, and roaring like beasts waking from hibernation. My first thought was that I must have been dreaming. But the rumble grew louder, the sound of brakes hissing and gears grinding as each bus slowed and lined up neatly along my property's front edge. Doors swung open, and chaos poured out. Families with coolers and chairs, kids dragging beach balls and inflatable swans, a man hauling a grill big enough for a tailgate. Within minutes, my field looked like a carnival, and leading them all, front and center, was her. HOA Karen. Early 50s, bleached hair teased high enough to interfere with radio signals, oversized sunglasses reflecting pure arrogance. Her sun hat was so wide it cast a shadow over everyone within 6 feet. She held a clipboard like a scepter, barking orders like she'd rehearsed this invasion for weeks. "Set up by the lake! We'll start games near the barn!" she shouted, voice slicing through the morning air. My jaw tightened. The lake. My lake. On my private land, far outside her HOA's jurisdiction. I didn't move right away. I stood still, coffee still warm in my hand, letting the scene unfold so I could process what I was seeing. It felt surreal, like watching trespassers build an empire right in front of you while pretending it was theirs. I walked down the driveway slowly, every step steady, the crunch of gravel under my boots loud against their laughter. The closer I got, the more her voice grated. Sharp, commanding, entitled. By the time I reached the fence line, she finally noticed me. "Oh, you're up early," she said with that patronizing smile, the kind people use when they know exactly what they're doing. "Don't worry, we'll clean up after. The community's just having a little fun by the lake." "The community?" I asked, voice calm but heavy. "Karen, this is my land." She waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Oh, stop being so territorial. It's for everyone. The HOA voted unanimously that this space could be used for events." "That's fascinating," I said evenly, "considering I'm not part of your HOA." Her smile faltered for half a second, then returned, tighter, colder. "We discussed that. It's under easement rights. You wouldn't understand the legal part." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Try me." Karen turned to her clipboard, flipping through papers dramatically before pulling one free and waving it like a royal decree. "See? It's all documented. This land falls under the extended recreational zone. You're actually obligated to allow access." I reached out and took the paper from her. She didn't expect that. Her hand lingered mid-air like she'd just been robbed. I unfolded the document and scanned it. HOA newsletters, fake bylaws. Nothing official, just words typed on standard printer paper with her signature at the bottom, bold and underlined twice. "You really went all out," I said, handing it back. But you forgot one detail. None of this means a damn thing. The crowd nearby started to pause, glancing between us. Karen's smile stiffened into something colder. You're being difficult, she said sharply. These people paid good money for this event. You don't want to ruin everyone's day. Paid, I repeated. The word hit me like a slap. You charged people to use my land? Her eyes flickered. It's a fundraiser for community upgrades. It's already organized, buses booked, everything approved. Approved by who? I asked, stepping closer. You? Color crept into her face. You're making a scene. No, Karen, I said quietly, my tone turning colder than the morning air. You made a crime scene. Her smile vanished. Around us, parents started murmuring, the spell breaking. One man turned toward her. Wait, this isn't HOA property? He asked. Karen ignored him, pretending not to hear. Another woman clutched her child's hand tighter. You said this was community land. Karen's voice cracked with irritation. Everyone relax. He's just being dramatic. This is all part of the plan. I took another slow sip, letting the silence drag before I spoke again. You've got 10 buses of trespassers on private property, I said calmly. That's not a plan. That's felony-level stupidity. Her mask cracked then, eyes narrowing, lips pressed tight. If you make me cancel this, I'll file fines. Obstruction of HOA events. You'll regret this. I laughed once, softly. You can't fine me. You don't own me. That's when it hit her, the full weight of what she'd done. For a heartbeat, the air went still, every sound muted. Then the crowd began to whisper again, and the anger turned toward her. Someone shouted, You told us you had permission. Another voice, We paid $200. The noise swelled, and for the first time, Karen looked trapped. I turned and walked toward the gate, chains rattling in my hand. She called out, What are you doing? Making sure nobody else trespasses, I said, and with one heavy pull, I swung the gate shut and snapped the padlock closed. The metallic click echoed across the field like a verdict. Karen froze, mouth open, clipboard trembling in her grip. The crowd fell silent, staring as I pocketed the key and looked her dead in the eye. You wanted control, Karen, I said. Now you've got it, on the wrong side of the fence. The next move was hers, but she didn't know that every second from here on out, I'd already planned. She thought she could bluff with paper and power. What she didn't know was that I had something far stronger. Proof, law, and time on my side. And as the first whispers of panic rippled through her event, I felt that old military calm settle in. She'd declared war without realizing who she'd picked a fight with. I wasn't always the man who locks 10 buses of trespassers behind a gate without flinching. That kind of calm only comes after years of learning that authority doesn't shout, it documents. Before I bought this land, I spent 2 decades serving in the military, most of it dealing with logistics and property protection in high-pressure zones, where losing control meant losing everything. Discipline was my oxygen, and law was my armor. After I retired, I worked as a federal compliance investigator, the kind of job where people lied for a living, and you learned to dismantle those lies with evidence. It was slow, methodical work, the kind that sharpens your patience until it's indistinguishable from power. That background was the reason I bought this property. 40 acres of open land with a lake that glimmered like a medal in the sun. No HOA, no board meetings, no self-important committees. Just the one thing the military and the corporate world never gave me. Quiet control. When I first moved in, I thought I'd finally found peace. The neighbors across the fence lived in the gated HOA community, a cluster of beige houses all perfectly spaced, lawns trimmed to regulation height, mailboxes matching like soldiers in formation. It was artificial order, sterile, predictable, and everything I'd sworn off. That's where I met her, HOA Karen, the neighborhood president, or as she liked to call herself, Community Operations Director. She was in her early 50s, divorced with a permanent air of entitlement and a voice that could turn syrup sour. The first time she walked onto my property, she didn't knock. She just appeared, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high, and said, "You know, you can't have that barn painted red. It violates community color standards." I'd looked her dead in the eye and said, "I'm not in your community." She laughed like she thought I was joking. "Oh, everyone around here is under HOA jurisdiction. It keeps things uniform." That word, uniform, was her drug. She fed on compliance, on submission, on the illusion that her clipboard held actual legal weight. I told her politely to get off my land and reminded her that I'd bought this property specifically because it was not under HOA control. I even showed her the deed and the zoning map. She left that day with a frozen smile that told me the conversation wasn't over. I'd seen that look before, the kind bureaucrats wear when they've just realized the person they're trying to control won't bend. Weeks passed. Then came the letters. HOA courtesy notices left in my mailbox about unauthorized structures, unapproved vehicles, and community decor violations. Each one was stamped with the HOA seal, as if that made them law. I ignored them all. Then came the fines, fake ones, typed neatly with due dates and threats of property liens. I sent them back unopened. That's when she escalated. She'd start showing up near the fence, pretending to inspect nearby houses while peering at my land like a vulture assessing her next meal. She'd wave to passing residents, saying things like, "He'll come around eventually, everyone does." The arrogance was staggering, but what got me wasn't her confidence. It was her ignorance. She didn't understand the law. HOAs operate within strict boundaries. Their authority ends where their property line does. My land wasn't just outside her reach. It was legally shielded by recorded exemptions dating back 20 years. That's why I bought it. It had been part of an old estate before the HOA was even formed. There were county plats, court filings, zoning maps, all of which established one fact. Karen and her HOA had no claim here, but she didn't like being told no. She started spreading rumors through her network of concerned citizens, claiming my land was a public use extension of the community. She even sent an email to residents saying I was voluntarily cooperating with the HOA's beautification projects. When I found out, I laughed. She was playing chess without realizing I'd built the board. What she never expected was that I'd fought this war before. Back when I worked federal compliance, I handled cases where HOAs overstepped. Illegal fines, fraudulent dues, privacy violations. I'd seen people like her crumble under documentation. Every law she twisted, every letter she falsified, every word she spread would be the rope she hung herself with. The key was timing. You don't strike when they're puffed up. You wait until they think they've won. That's why when the flyers started appearing about the community lakeside event, I didn't confront her immediately. I wanted her to commit to the lie. And she did. In the weeks leading up to the invasion, I gathered everything. Screenshots of her posts, copies of the flyers, the HOAs, financial newsletter that mentioned event funds, and even footage from my gate camera showing her or her people leaving those flyers on my property. It was all neat, dated, time-stamped. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbors, not the sheriff, not even my lawyer. I wanted her confidence to peak before it broke. What Karen didn't realize was that she wasn't dealing with just another angry homeowner. She was dealing with someone who'd been trained to build cases from the ground up, someone who knew how to weaponize the truth with surgical precision. When the day came and those 10 buses arrived, I wasn't surprised. It was exactly the scale of madness I expected from her. The only thing that did surprise me was how many people she'd deceived. Families, retirees, young couples, all under the illusion that this was some grand community picnic. She'd even gone so far as to collect money, proof of organized fraud. That was when my calm stopped being just discipline. It became strategy. I wasn't just defending land, I was documenting a federal-grade case of misrepresentation and trespass. Every word I spoke that morning was deliberate, every pause calculated. When I told her, "You made a crime scene," I wasn't being poetic. I was stating fact. I knew what she'd done crossed multiple lines: state trespass laws, fraudulent use of property, and misuse of HOA funds. I knew that the moment I locked that gate, I had leverage. But this wasn't about revenge for me, not yet. This was about authority, about restoring the boundary she'd erased in her mind. As I stood watching her flounder among the angry crowd, I felt that cold, steady focus from my old military days, the one you get right before a mission starts. There's no adrenaline, no panic, just clarity. She had no idea she was standing on a legal minefield she'd built herself. Every bus, every flyer, every false claim was evidence, and I had all of it. She still thought she was running an event. What she didn't know was that she'd just signed the opening act of her downfall. The last thing I remember before the deputies arrived was her voice cracking as she yelled into her phone, probably calling the same county office I'd worked with for years. She had no clue that the man she was trying to intimidate had once trained half the officers she'd soon be begging for leniency from. That's the thing about authority. It's quiet, patient, and absolute when it needs to be. And I was about to show her exactly what that looked like. Karen's power wasn't built on rules, it was built on fear. Inside her HOA, compliance was currency, and she printed it daily. Every neighbor I spoke to had a story. One man said she fined him $300 for leaving his trash cans out an hour past pickup. Another family told me she sent warning letters about their teenage son's car being too loud. She operated like a dictator disguised as a neighbor, using HOA bylaws as weapons, twisting every clause until she owned the narrative. The board was her echo chamber. 5 members, all hand-picked loyalists. The treasurer, an accountant she'd dated briefly after her divorce. The secretary, her best friend who'd been on the committee since its creation, and a vice president who owed her favors after she covered up a zoning violation on his rental property. Together, they ran the neighborhood like a private fiefdom. And with her cousin in the city clerk's office and her golf partner sitting on the county zoning board, she believed herself untouchable. That illusion of control made her reckless. She started using HOA funds like her personal wallet, expenses labeled as beautification initiatives or community engagement programs that never materialized. Every dollar went into vanity projects designed to keep her throne polished, and anyone who questioned her authority was met with thinly veiled threats about code compliance inspections. But her biggest weapon was her image. She'd built herself up as the benevolent enforcer, the one who kept standards high. She'd stroll through the community in her pastel blazer, smile plastered on, clipboard in hand, greeting everyone with a fake warmth that hid her cruelty. Behind closed doors, though, her words cut like razors. I'd overheard her once at a community gathering bragging about teaching residents lessons through fines. They pay faster when they feel watched, she'd laughed. It was that mindset, the hunger to dominate, that eventually made her decide my land should fall under her rule too. She hated seeing something beautiful she couldn't control. My fields, my barn, my lake. They mocked her. Her own community had no open space, no natural beauty, just sterile rows of identical homes. My property was freedom made visible, and that was something she couldn't tolerate. I later learned from one of her board members, a man named Eric who'd grown tired of her tyranny, that Karen had been plotting her expansion for months. She'd been whispering at meetings that my land was technically within the community's aesthetic radius, a term she made up on the spot. She used it to justify sending flyers for community events near the lake. At first her board resisted, but Karen had something on all of them. Favor debts, personal secrets, social leverage. She knew which buttons to press to keep everyone in line. She'd mention a treasurer's daughter's college application one week, or a secretary's HOA violation from 2 years back the next. It was psychological warfare, suburbia style. Then came the fundraiser idea, the one that led to the 10-bus fiasco. Karen told the board it would bring good press to the community and raise money for HOA improvements. She claimed she had an arrangement with the landowner, me, to host it. Some believed her, others didn't dare question her. She forged fake correspondence and invoices to make it appear legitimate. She even told residents that I was donating use of my land to support neighborhood unity. She convinced dozens of families to pay participation fees of up to $200 per household, pocketing thousands. Her plan was simple: run the event, declare it a success, and use the photos to claim shared recreational space in future HOA filings, effectively expanding her reach. It was manipulation dressed as management. The more I learned about her, the clearer the picture became. Karen wasn't just arrogant, she was pathological. Control was her oxygen. She needed it to feel relevant, powerful, alive. Her HOA presidency wasn't a civic role. It was her identity. Losing authority over one stubborn homeowner, even one outside her jurisdiction, was like losing a limb. That's why she targeted me. I represented everything she couldn't bend. The more I ignored her letters, the more obsessed she became. When she started distributing flyers claiming my land was open for community use, it wasn't about the event anymore. It was about proving she could still win. And the community, those poor neighbors, had no idea how deep her manipulation went. They saw the polished version, the smiling woman at the town hall meetings, the kind face who fought for property values. They didn't see the other side, the threats, the fabrications, the intimidation. She'd gaslighted an entire neighborhood into believing she was the law itself. By the time she arranged those buses, she had everyone convinced that stepping onto my property was their right. They didn't question it because questioning Karen meant exile. I'd heard about residents who tried to resist. One family fined into foreclosure, another sued over a broken fence. Karen's reach was poison wrapped in paperwork. But there was one flaw in her empire: her ego. She never imagined anyone could beat her at her own game. She didn't understand that her paper empire would collapse the moment real law entered the picture. That's why she forged those fake easement documents so carelessly. That's why she charged money without consulting the county. She thought her clipboard carried the same weight as a badge. It didn't. And I knew that when the time came, that arrogance would be her undoing. In her mind, I was just another rebellious homeowner. She didn't realize I was the one man in that county who'd built federal cases against people like her for a living. I didn't need to raise my voice to destroy her. I just needed to wait. Every move she made brought her closer to legal suicide, and she didn't even know it. I knew when I finally stepped forward, I'd do it with precision. Every document, every witness, every law ready to crush her claims. Because Karen didn't just represent a bad neighbor, she represented every entitled official who thought authority meant ownership. I'd seen her kind in government, in corporations, even in war zones. Power corrupts, but unchecked power destroys itself. So when those buses arrived, I wasn't just watching a trespass unfold. I was watching a system implode. Her board members would turn on her once the truth came out. Her allies in the city would distance themselves the second the sheriff cited her for fraud. The HOA she'd ruled through fear would crumble overnight. And as I stood on my porch that morning, hearing those engines thunder down my drive, I realized this wasn't a simple story about property rights. It was about principle. It was about one woman's obsession meeting a man who refused to yield. She'd built her life on the illusion that rules made her powerful. I'd spent mine learning that real power comes from knowing which rules can break her. I spent the night after the invasion combing through every scrap of evidence I had, my office light spilling across maps, printouts, and open folders spread across the table like a battlefield. Years of training had conditioned me to start with structure, establish the chain of events, isolate motive, prove intent. Karen's arrogance wasn't random, it was methodical. She'd orchestrated the entire fraud under the assumption that no one would ever challenge her. But her mistake was assuming I'd play defense. I'd been playing offense since the first flyer hit my gate. The first thing I did was pull county parcel data, overlaying property boundaries from digital archives with the HOA's official plot registry. My land sat outside their legal zone by 0.8 miles, a distance irrelevant to anyone but a lawyer, yet fatal to Karen's case. I printed it, stamped the coordinates, and cross-referenced the documentation with the county's digital ledger. Then I compared it against the fraudulent extended easement document Karen had circulated. That's when I saw it. The date on her forgery predated the HOA's own establishment by 5 years. She'd backdated fake papers without realizing the HOA didn't even exist then. That single oversight alone made her entire defense radioactive. But I didn't stop there. I called an old contact from my federal compliance days, a property rights consultant who owed me a favor. I asked her to pull state-level zoning maps and cross-check the HOA's claimed jurisdiction. It took her 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew. There were no easements, no annexations, no legal filings connecting my parcel to their development. The HOA's jurisdiction expansion Karen had bragged about to her members wasn't just invalid, it was illegal. She had forged a document that impersonated a county record. Under state law, that fell under falsifying public documents, a felony. My consultant's voice over the phone was calm but sharp. If you push this, you could bury her. That was exactly what I intended to do. Next, I reviewed every flyer and communication tied to the HOA event. The flyers referenced authorized community recreational use and bore the HOA's logo. They were printed on premium cardstock, suggesting they'd come from the HOA's central printer, funded by member dues. I knew that if I traced the expense, I could prove misuse of funds. So I requested a certified audit of the HOA's financial filings, something every association is required by state law to keep on record. The clerk at the records office, one of the few people not under Karen's sway, sent me digital copies within hours. I found a line item labeled Community Recreation Logistics, $7,600. That's where the bus rentals came from. She'd paid for 10 charter buses with HOA money, pretending it was for community outreach. The irony was brutal. She'd used her own members' funds to commit fraud against them. To seal the case, I reviewed footage from my property cameras. My gate system captured timestamps of every unauthorized entry. And there it was. Karen herself, 2 days before the event, stapling flyers onto my fence with her manicured hands. I paused the frame, zoomed in until her smug expression filled the screen. I printed that still image and clipped it to the top of the file marked Evidence A. Beneath it, I stacked the rest. Maps, forged documents, transaction records, and screenshots of community messages where she bragged about expanding HOA recreational reach. It was no longer about a personal dispute. It was about exposing a network of deceit run by a woman who'd mistaken influence for immunity. I spent hours drafting a formal complaint addressed to the county property commissioner, the sheriff's office, and the state's community governance department. I cited each relevant statute: trespass under State Property Code 30.05, misappropriation of HOA funds under Civil Code Section 5233, and fraudulent misrepresentation under Penal Code 115, each charge supported by physical evidence, dates, and visual proof. I kept my tone clinical and cold, the way I used to write case reports in the field. It wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. I knew that the second this reached the right hands, Karen's illusion of authority would evaporate. But I wasn't content to just bury her legally. I wanted to dismantle her psychologically first. I waited. I knew she'd reach out after the chaos. Sure enough, 2 days later, she left a voicemail, her tone brittle but forced calm. "We need to talk," she said, trying to sound composed. "There's been a misunderstanding. The event got out of hand." I replayed that message twice. There it was, her first admission: misunderstanding. She was already shifting from confidence to damage control. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer, marking it admission of guilt. The next morning, I drove down to the county recorder's office with my full documentation. The clerk, an older man who'd seen more HOA disputes than he cared to count, looked through my stack, whistled low, and said, "She really thought she could annex your property?" I nodded. He shook his head and stamped my submission. "Consider this filed." From that moment, the wheels of the system started turning, slow but unstoppable. By the end of the week, I got a call from a detective assigned to the case. He confirmed that the sheriff's office had received multiple complaints from residents who'd paid for the community event. Karen had tried to spin the narrative, saying I'd unlawfully detained them. But her story fell apart the moment law enforcement saw the property boundaries and receipts. I didn't need to lift a finger. Her own lies were eating her alive. Every complaint she filed contradicted another. When investigators checked the HOA's accounts, they found that most of the money she collected never even went into the official fund. It was wired to her personal account, labeled as event coordination fee. That turned the case from misdemeanor fraud into felony embezzlement. The county's compliance officer emailed me personally. "Your documentation was the cleanest case submission we've ever received." It wasn't pride I felt. It was relief. Years of staying calm under pressure had paid off. But I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to ensure that when Karen fell, she wouldn't take the community with her. I reached out to Eric, the board member who'd quietly opposed her. I shared just enough of the evidence to convince him the HOA needed to distance itself immediately. He was shaken, but cooperative. Within days, he called an emergency board meeting without her knowledge. He told them what I'd uncovered, showed them the financial proof, and warned that if they didn't act fast, they'd all be implicated. They voted unanimously to suspend Karen pending investigation. For the first time, the monster she'd built turned on her. Watching it unfold was like observing the precise collapse of a structure I'd spent months mapping. Every brick fell exactly where I'd predicted. Karen's grip on her followers slipped through her fingers one meeting at a time, until she was just another neighbor under review, stripped of her titles, her allies scrambling to protect themselves. And all it took was patience, documentation, and the kind of cold authority that doesn't shout. It just waits for the law to speak. The day of reckoning came faster than anyone expected. By the following weekend, Karen's illusion of control was already cracking. But she didn't know it yet. I was in my workshop when I heard the familiar click of high heels on gravel, a sound that didn't belong out here. I looked up to see her marching toward me again, dressed like she was headed to a country club meeting instead of a confrontation, her oversized sunglasses hiding the panic swelling behind her composure. "We need to clear the air," she said, voice sharp, hands clutching that same clipboard like it was armor. I wiped my hands and faced her squarely. "You lost the right to speak on my land the moment you used it for profit," I replied. She tried to stand taller, tried to summon that signature condescending tone, but it wavered. "You've created a huge problem for yourself," she said. "You locked people in, you humiliated me publicly, and the HOA will not tolerate being disrespected like that." The way she said, "the HOA," sounded less like a community and more like a crown she couldn't bear to give up. I kept my voice low, steady. "You mean the HOA that suspended you?" Her face twitched. That hit the mark. "They met without you," I continued. "Voted to remove you as acting president pending investigation. I'm guessing that wasn't part of your clipboard plan." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The silence between us stretched, thick and tense. "You think you can ruin me with paperwork?" she finally hissed. "I built this neighborhood from the ground up. They'll see through your little charade." I took a step closer. "You didn't build anything," I said quietly. "You manipulated people. You took their money, their peace, and their trust. Now you'll answer for all three." That was when she snapped. "You don't understand how this works," she screamed, her voice echoing across the open field. "I am the HOA. Everything here exists because of me." Her words hung in the air like a confession. "You were just a guest," she added, pointing a shaking finger at me. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Guests leave when they're told to, Karen. You didn't. That's why this ends now." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket and showed her the open email thread with the county's legal division. "This," I said, tilting the screen toward her, "is how it ends." She stared at it, and for the first time, her posture faltered. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of the system she'd finally lost control over. She tried one last move, a desperate attempt to reclaim her image. The next day, she called a community emergency meeting, sending out mass messages to residents claiming I had staged everything to discredit the HOA. But what she didn't know was that the sheriff's office had already briefed several board members on the investigation. When she stepped up to speak in front of the crowd, her usual poise was replaced by forced charm, her smile cracking at the edges. "There's been a misunderstanding," she began, trying to steady her voice. "Certain individuals are trying to divide our community." But the crowd wasn't buying it. They had already seen the receipts, the bank transfers, and the sheriff's report. I stood quietly at the back, arms crossed, letting her words crumble in real time. One man stood up mid-meeting and said, "You charged us $200 to picnic on land that wasn't even ours." Another woman added, "You told us he donated it. You lied to us." Karen's throat bobbed, her voice shrinking as the questions multiplied. "This is all being exaggerated," she said, panic seeping into her tone. "It was for community improvement." The crowd erupted. No longer applause, no longer compliance, just raw anger. She tried to control it, calling for order, but no one listened. It was poetic in a way. The same people she had dominated for years were finally speaking without fear. They didn't see her as their leader anymore. They saw her for what she was, a fraud who'd mistaken paperwork for power. As the meeting devolved into chaos, I stepped forward, not to gloat, not to humiliate, but to finish what I'd started. "I didn't want this," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the noise. "I warned her to stay off my land. I told her the law would handle it, but she thought she was above it. Now the law's here." Everyone turned as two county deputies entered the hall, their presence instantly silencing the room. Karen froze, her mouth parting slightly as one of them approached her. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "you're being served with a notice of investigation and temporary restraining order regarding unauthorized use of private property and embezzlement of HOA funds." The clipboard slipped from her hands, papers scattering like feathers across the floor. She looked at me with disbelief, but there was no hatred left in her eyes, just realization. She'd lost. They didn't arrest her that day. Investigations like these take time. But the public humiliation was worse than any handcuffs. Cameras were rolling, residents filming on their phones, reporters tipped off by an anonymous source who'd forwarded the county filings. I didn't have to speak again. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Karen stumbled out of that meeting, surrounded by silence and shame, her empire of fear crumbling behind her. It was over, but the fallout was only beginning. In the days that followed, the story spread across every local channel. HOA president under investigation for fraud and trespass. The headlines read. Neighbors I'd never spoken to before stopped by to thank me, saying they finally felt free to speak without consequence. The HOA board released a statement distancing themselves from Karen, promising transparency and reforms. But behind all the PR talk, they knew the truth. She'd poisoned their credibility beyond repair. Every fine she'd ever issued was now under review. Every financial decision she'd ever made was being audited. She wasn't just losing power, she was erasing her legacy with her own lies. Still, I wasn't satisfied until I saw the official notice posted to the county site. Pending criminal review. It was short, clinical, and final. I poured myself a drink that night, sat out on the porch, and watched the sunset paint the sky gold. My land was quiet again, untouched, unclaimed, exactly as it should be. The gate she once forced open now stood locked, not out of spite, but as a symbol. She had spent years thinking she could own everyone and everything around her. Now she'd finally learned the difference between power and permission. And the truth was, the only authority that ever mattered on this land was the law, and me. When the county's investigation turned formal, I didn't just watch from the sidelines. I made sure it went exactly where it needed to go. I met with the assistant district attorney in a quiet conference room at the courthouse, a folder in my hand thicker than most case files he'd probably seen all month. He read in silence as I sat across from him, arms folded, waiting. Every page in that file told the story in perfect order. Dates, signatures, screenshots, video stills, payment records, forged HOA documents. It wasn't speculation. It was evidence so airtight it might as well have been a confession. When he finally looked up, his tone was measured but firm. "You've done half my work already," he said. "We'll move forward with charges. Trespass, misrepresentation, and misappropriation of community funds." That was the moment I knew Karen's empire was done for good. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about closure. Within days, subpoenas went out to the HOA's financial institution. Investigators found multiple wire transfers from the HOA's main account into an alias account under Karen's name, labeled Community Outreach. She'd siphoned over $12,000 over the course of 3 months. The sheriff's department executed a warrant for her home office, seizing the desktop computer she'd used to draft those fake easement documents. Forensic techs later confirmed the metadata matched the files she'd distributed. The fraud was undeniable, and the cover-up sloppy. I didn't need to celebrate. Her downfall was mechanical, predictable. She'd built her reputation on intimidation and paperwork, and now paperwork was the very thing strangling her. When the official notice of charges arrived, I didn't feel triumph. I felt vindication. I'd spent months being called difficult, arrogant, unneighborly. Now, every accusation reversed direction like a boomerang. The HOA board, desperate to salvage what remained, voted to dissolve all executive privileges tied to her tenure. They issued a public statement acknowledging financial irregularities and promising a full audit. But the damage was irreversible. Members were withdrawing en masse, homeowners petitioning to terminate HOA status altogether. The same neighborhood that once lived in fear of Karen's clipboard now rejected the very institution she'd built. For me, retaliation was never about vengeance. It was about precision. After the legal wheels began turning, I filed civil action against her personally, citing emotional distress, property trespass, and defamation. My attorney, a former colleague from my compliance days, drafted it with surgical detail. He included every instance of her harassment, from the first falsified letter to the day of the buses. The lawsuit totaled just under $500,000 in damages. She tried to countersue, of course, claiming I'd illegally detained residents during the event. But the court dismissed it before it even reached hearing. The sheriff's report, along with witness statements, made it clear that I'd simply secured private property pending law enforcement arrival. Her lies had no ground to stand on. The deposition was something I'll never forget. Karen sat across the table, hands trembling as my attorney questioned her line by line. Gone was the sharp-tongued dictator. In her place was a worn-out woman stripped of pretense. Every time she tried to twist the truth, my lawyer countered with documentation. Every denial collapsed under another exhibit. "You claimed this event was for HOA members, correct?" he'd ask. She'd nod weakly. "Then why did you collect fees from non-members?" Silence. "You said this land was under HOA jurisdiction. Where is the annexation record?" Silence again. It was like watching her drown in the same paper ocean she'd once ruled over. By the end of that deposition, she was crying quietly. Not because she cared about justice, but because she finally understood what it meant to lose. The verdict came months later, but the outcome was everything I'd prepared for. The county charged her with fraud and unlawful trespass, sentencing her to probation, fines, and restitution. She was ordered to pay back every cent she'd stolen from the HOA and reimburse damages to me personally. The civil case followed shortly after, and when the settlement was announced, the number spoke louder than any argument: $280,000 in restitution, along with an official apology filed with the county clerk. I didn't care about the money. What mattered was the line written in legal ink. The property at Lakefield Estates Parcel 19 shall remain under sole ownership of its title holder, exempt from any HOA or community jurisdiction. That sentence was the nail in her coffin, the one thing she could never erase. After that, Karen disappeared from public life. Her house went up for sale, the same one she'd ruled from like a throne. Rumor had it she moved 2 counties over to live with her sister, unable to show her face at any local meeting. The HOA she'd weaponized collapsed entirely. Without her manipulation, residents realized they didn't need control. They needed peace. The gates that once divided the neighborhood were left open, and for the first time, people started living without fear of fines, threats, or inspections. I didn't feel sorry for her. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was a product of her own corruption. What she'd done went beyond greed. It was a violation of trust, the kind that leaves scars long after the paperwork fades. When I walked past the lake at dusk, the water reflecting that perfect stillness again, I thought about how simple all of it could have been. If she'd just left me alone, if she'd respected a boundary clearly drawn, none of it would have happened. But people like Karen don't stop until something stops them. And sometimes, the only thing that stops them is the law delivered without mercy. There's a kind of peace that comes after justice, the kind that doesn't shout or celebrate, it just settles. That's what my land felt like again. No buses, no trespassers, no noise, just the wind through the grass and the low hum of life continuing exactly as it should. I'd turned Karen's arrogance into her undoing and reminded her, and everyone else watching, that freedom isn't negotiated. It's defended. When it was finally over, when the court filings turned to dust and the neighborhood forgot her name, I realized victory doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just silence, the kind of silence that feels earned. The HOA was gone, dismantled from the inside out, its bylaws voided and bank accounts frozen pending liquidation. Karen's name was scrubbed from the official records, the words "former president" replaced with "disqualified." The residents, freed from her control, began to rebuild what she'd destroyed. The same people who once whispered in fear of her fines now gathered freely on weekends, kids laughing on the same lawns that used to be inspected for grass height. It was poetic justice in motion. The very structure she built to control others became the wreckage she left behind. And me? I didn't need to raise my voice or write a manifesto. I just kept living exactly the way I intended. On my land, under my rules, answerable to no one but the law itself. I remember the day I received the final letter from the county clerk confirming that all claims against my property had been permanently dismissed. It was brief and unceremonious, but when I read it, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lifted. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into a file labeled HOA Karen closed, and locked it away. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finality. For years I'd watched people like her manipulate systems meant to serve them, turning community into hierarchy, friendship into obedience. That illusion of authority, the idea that you can buy power with a title and a clipboard, had finally met the immovable truth of accountability. A few weeks later, I was sitting by the lake one evening, the same one she'd tried to claim as community property. The sun was dipping low, and the water glowed like liquid copper. For the first time since all of it began, I wasn't thinking about evidence or consequences. I was just listening. To the quiet, to the way. Peace hums when it's protected. My daughter came to visit, bringing her 2 kids with her, and they ran along the shore collecting pebbles and skipping stones. It struck me that this was what Karen could never understand. Control can't create peace. It only imitates it. The real thing grows naturally when people are left to live without fear. That's what this land had always meant to me. It wasn't just property. It was a promise that freedom still existed somewhere in this over-regulated world. I heard through the grapevine that Karen tried to start over in another county, joining a new neighborhood association under a different name. But that kind of reputation doesn't wash off. People recognized her, and within months, she was asked to leave. The irony was almost too perfect. After years of policing others, she became the one no community wanted. Her downfall wasn't loud, but it was complete. Every bit of the arrogance that once filled her voice had drained away, leaving nothing but the faint echo of someone who mistook fear for respect. As for me, I made one final change to my property after everything ended. I replaced the old metal gate with a solid oak one, strong, simple, carved with the words, "Private land. Respect it or lose it." Not as a threat, but as a reminder. The people who come here now know what it stands for. Every neighbor, every friend, every delivery driver who passes through understands this place isn't just fenced by wood or steel. It's fenced by principle. And that principle was tested and proven. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the moment the deputies served her in that meeting hall. The way the papers fluttered to the floor, the stunned faces of her followers, the sudden quiet after years of noise. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was justice, pure and unembellished. There's a difference between punishing someone and stopping them. I hadn't punished her, I'd stopped her, and that was enough. The community that once looked down on me for standing apart now waves when they drive past my gate. Some of them even stop by with homemade pies or small gifts, tokens of apology for doubting me. I accept them with a smile because it's not about proving them wrong anymore. It's about showing them that boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary. I didn't defend my land because I was stubborn. I defended it because I believe in something too many people have forgotten, the right to be left alone. The lake is still, the fields are green, and the only sound now is the wind through the trees. Sometimes I think about how close I came to losing it all, to being another victim of bureaucracy and arrogance disguised as community service. But then I remember the look on her face when reality finally caught up, and I know why I fought. Karen thought she could rewrite ownership with paper and pride. In the end, the only thing she wrote was her own downfall. I still keep her forged documents tucked in a folder in my safe, a reminder of how far corruption will go when unchecked. They sit next to my deed and my veteran's flag, the two pieces of paper that actually mean something. Every so often when I look at them, I smile and think of the lesson she taught me without realizing it. Power borrowed from fear will always collapse when it meets someone who doesn't scare easily. And now, as the sun sets over my land, the same land she once called ours, I can finally breathe again. No committees, no meetings, no rules disguised as kindness, just quiet ownership, just earned peace. She tried to take what wasn't hers, but in doing so, she gave me something better. The proof that truth, when patient and precise, doesn't need revenge. It just needs time. And time, unlike power, always runs out for people like HOA Karen,